But actually, I mean, seriously, before we start, I do want to say that's what this whole idea is about. It's about connecting the dots and seeing that there's so much incredible work being done across the state. And some amazing programs like Kathy Dreyer is here from Law Related Education in Utah, and
Hi, Kathy.
part of that whole vision of We the People. Victoria's here with mock trials. So lots of opportunities to really make the civic connections. So,
and we will discuss later ways that you can connect with each other.
Yeah, and we'll make sure that there's lots of easy ways to do that. Okay, so we're going to start because it's time. And Judy's going to share her screen. So everybody, before we share the screen, remember that you can always kind of like move your vision. If you want to see people, I know that we're also isolated. So if you want to see people, just work with your Zoom screen to see how, see what works. In terms of the norms for your video camera, obviously, if you can't have your video on, we understand that. If you're having a really bad hair day, I can relate. But other than that, if you can keep your camera on, it's just so great to see human faces. We need that, and that's what Civics is all about. It's about connecting humans. So we're delighted to see you all. And I just have to say really fast, meetings like this later in the afternoon can be a really hard time, but it's also a really great time to kind of brainstorm and be visionary and be creative. And so that's exciting. And John Arthur, who just has said in the chat that I've never had a bad hair day in my life. John, I have photographic evidence that will refute that. I promise you. John Arthur, ladies and gentlemen, is a finalist for the National Teacher of the Year, ladies and gentlemen. So we want to give a hoot and holler to John. You're getting this beautiful Zoom love. Okay. All right, so welcome. So what is this group? It is an informal group of stakeholders who are engaged in expanding and improving civic education. I know you can read, but I wanted to read that out loud to remind you, this is an informal group. It's a collaborative. You're fine to go ahead and move on to the next slide. We got lots to do and you don't need to listen to me. So we do want to thank, in particular, UServe Utah that is helping support this work. And again, one more organization that's doing great work and that people may or may not be aware of. So we're delighted to collaborate with UServe Utah. All right, next slide, please, Judy Hillman. I'm going to give you a really quick overview of our agenda. We are going to remind people about the purpose. We're going to look at some of the progress and updates that we've had since our meeting in January. I'm going to talk about why and how we're a collaborative. We're going to talk about some new participants. Judy's going to talk about new participants. We're going to talk about our work groups, and you can see the web page that Judy has been so diligently working on, because nothing exists unless there's a web page. So that's exciting. We're going to look a little bit at what happened in the last legislative session, kind of get an overview and debrief and see some of the energy there. And then we're going to talk about what are the best ways to share information. What are the best ways so you don't get inundated with tons of emails, but you can still feel like there's a collaborative communication going in our work. Then we have a special guest, Shawn Healy, who's with us right now, is going to talk about some of the work that might be possible for a collaborative like this, looking at some of the opportunities that other states have done, and so we'll have a Q&A with him. Then we'll send you into work groups. The work group topics are going to be shared out later. We'll talk about that, and then we'll come back with the debrief. But we really want you to spend a lot of good quality time with one another. So that's planned for today. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so when I thought of this idea, I created this Utah Civic Learning Coalition. Well, let's call it a collaborative instead, because that's what we're doing. We're collaborating, and we're coming together to figure out how do we synergize and maximize our efforts So that's our vision. That's our story. That's the story, and I'm sticking to it. That we are we're better by working together regarding civic education. And if you leave here today having met one new person, if you leave here today being energized by one new idea about the work you're already doing, if you leave here today realizing that you've got other colleagues who care strongly about this kind of work, then our mission is going to be met. Okay. Next slide, please.
Let me go more slowly. Okay.
All right, thank you. So let's talk about what this work is about. And I think it helps to, again, remind us what civic and character education how it is referred to in statute. And I really like this definition. I think this definition is a very inclusive definition. When you think about civic and character education, this is what statute says. Civic education means the cultivation of informed, responsible participation in political life by competent citizens committed to the fundamental values and principles of representative democracy in Utah and the United States. Now, if we think about that text and you think about what are the ways you are personally helping further that vision, and what are the challenges that we face, and what are the opportunities, I think it's a pretty expansive, welcoming, and broad opportunity for lots of different approaches to civic education. We have so many separate programs that are devoted to civic education, and that's great because there's no one fix to the kinds of outcomes we want for students, but there are certainly ways that we can collaborate and work together. Character education means reaffirming values and qualities of character which promote an upright and desirable citizenry. And again, that's about us saying, you know, how these are inextricably linked. Character and civic education go hand in hand. And I think it's a pretty cool thing that in Utah, we've really wedded those two concepts together because the research about the best practices regarding civics bears that out, right? So Judy, next slide.
Okay. Can you all hear me okay? There were some other adjustments that we've made since the January 15th kickoff that I'm really excited about because I ended up learning a lot in some of these transitions. So the media literacy group was originally called Media and Digital Literacy and Discussion of Controversial Topics Group. And what we realized is, first of all, there's media literacy, which is this really big umbrella, right? And within that, all we care about is digital citizenship. We don't want to concern ourselves with digital literacy because that could be about computer programming, how to turn on your computer, how to protect yourself from viruses. We don't want that, okay? So we are media literacy and digital citizenship. We also recognize that kids these days, they live on their phones, right? Some of us adults too. Now, if you live on your phones, we realize that if we want to make progress, measurable progress on media literacy and digital citizenship, that's all we will do. So even though discussion of sensitive or contentious topics is obviously going to come up in that context, we felt that issue of being able to respectfully deliberate about current or past events or contentious topics belonged with the classroom learning group, because classroom learning in civics and government, etc., it's about the foundations of our democracy and the Constitution, and really taking those to heart and understanding what all of those things mean. But it's also learning civic skills. Included under civic skills are the ability to argue or understand different points of view and have a respectful and productive discussion about controversial or sensitive topics. And so that's an adjustment we've made. And those of you who signed up for a certain work group, if you need to jump, just private chat me, and we can help you move over to the work group that you want. But I think most of you have been able to land safely in the midst of all of those changes. So thank you. And thank you so much for the amazing work group facilitators that we have. These are real leaders in the field, even nationally. Michelle Linford from Epic Digital has really helped us understand these relationships in a really, really useful way. She's here. She's one of our co-facilitators with William Shields in the Media Literacy Digital Citizenship, I'm learning how to say it, group. And Jeff Noakes is really a national expert on discussing controversial events in history, but also current events. And Axel Ramirez in his work has a wonderful focus on making sure that what we're studying in terms of civics and how and the content of those discussions is welcoming and inclusive to all different groups, no matter where you come from. So that's just a quick preview of 4 amazing co-facilitators that we have that have helped us make some of those important adjustments. So thank you.
And we want to remind you that this work, it's a collaborative. So if these work groups aren't meeting your needs, then we can redesign. But the whole idea behind the work groups is they were created based on the research that we know about promising practices in civics education that came out with the Guardians of Democracy report and other work that really says, if you focus on these things, you can make a difference in terms of civic education. All right, so Don Harvey, are you ready? Because now is your chance. Judy is going to talk about all the cool people who have joined us. But what I want, Don Harvey's going to show you by going to the chat and putting her name and her affiliation in the chat. And that's going to be our way to make sure that everybody here has a record of and can refer back to know who these other little squares of people are in their lives. So Judy?
Okay. I have to say that I'm actually pulling up the list so you can see just how exciting it is. And I can share that in just a minute because I can switch what screen I am sharing to my understanding. Yeah. Okay. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay. But what I want you to do, actually, all of you, take a moment right now in the chat. One of the things that's say who you are, if you have an organizational affiliation, what is that? If you want to say a sentence about what brings you to this collaborative, that would be great too. Go ahead and do that. And while you're doing that, I want to share with you something really delightful. So in your January 15th meeting, you were trying to hammer out what do you want to focus on and priorities and who's missing from the table. And many of the work groups came up with, hey, you know who's missing? This person, that person, this organization, get them on there. So we have tried to invite some of those missing persons, and a lot of you showed up and you're here. You can see some really outstanding individuals and backgrounds that have come together for this. And I just think that's going to bode well for the hard work and the difficult changes that we want to make. So thank you. And that's what I have for that, Robert.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to keep letting folks in.
Okay.
But I mean, even this morning, we have the coolest thing. This morning, we got an email from somebody who's doing this really cool art project regarding who is American. And it's a project that involves art and artistic expression and kids really defining themselves in terms of their own identity. And media literacy is a piece of that. And that person's joining us later today. They cleared their schedule and they're going to even join this group. So, I mean, it's kind of neat to see and and celebrate the kinds of things that are going on. You know, the Freedom Festival down in Provo has a First Amendment essay contest that we are able to spread the word about, and we hope teachers are, you know, getting their kids excited about possibilities of winning some cash and prizes for essay contests. I mean, so there are some really cool synergistic opportunities that we've been able to spotlight. All right, next slide, Judy. What's up?
Okay, so now I'm going to take you on a quick tour. One of the things that we wanted to do with this collaborative is to get down to brass tacks, to get down to some real practical accomplishments right out of the gate. Here we are. Can you guys see the website, such as it is? Okay.
Yep.
Worry too much about design at this point. But anyway, the Utah Civic Learning Collaborative has its own set of web pages. Okay. And really, you know, these days websites are just sort of a collection point for all of your stuff. So you can find here, there's a video, there's a slide deck from our first meeting on January 15th, if you want to see that. This has, you know, a page for each of our work group focus areas. It sort of outlines a purpose for the collaborative. And it actually, we're citing the statute that you heard about earlier right in here. We have a little bit in here on the Utah Portrait of a Graduate, which has been very important for this work. And that's a teaser right there for you to watch the video from the first meeting where Superintendent Sid Dixon walked us through all of the wonderful civic angles in Utah's Portrait of a Graduate. Okay. Now, let's go. I have something very exciting to show you. I'm going to go right to the character and school culture group. So this is an example of a web page for a work group. And this is the character, social, emotional learning, and school culture group. Okay, a little bit of, it frames it there. Do you remember when you guys were ranking the priorities that we came up with? And then we had to go and kind of weight those. So here's how they came out, those priorities. So you see them right at the top. Okay, now let me turn your attention to, arguably, I'm going to make this bigger so that people can see it better. Is that good? Is that better? Okay. Okay. So now this is my favorite part of this is, and I think in several work groups you actually asked to start to show the alignment between our activities and the Utah core standards. And not just the Utah core standards for social studies, but whatever core standards might pertain to what the progress we're trying to make. So since this work group really wants to highlight and strengthen, elevate civics in early learning, what we do is we go through, we give you the core standards for early learning and help you see where to look for some of those alignments. And here you can see social studies, strands 1 through 5. Okay, I have to change that. And then there's other resources here. Okay, and then if I go to the experiential civics, I've done this one a little differently. Experiential civics, academic service learning simulations. You see some of the priorities there, which you'll talk about in that work group. And then you go down here, and it was actually easier and I think more interesting for everybody to show in the Utah core standards for the social studies. I actually pull out sections that pertain directly to experiential learning and service learning and simulations. And then there's more resources down here. So there's some of that core standards alignment that we try to do for all the groups. The only group I haven't done it yet, oh, let me show you one more really quick. Down here, media literacy, and I'm still changing some of that, but we find ourselves wandering into the elementary library media core standards for some stuff on media literacy. That's fine. The digital citizenship related core standards has some stuff in there, not much on digital citizenship. And then there's some excellent resources here from Utah, including EPIC Deliberate Digital and Digital Citizenship Utah, which sort of came out of the legislature. Some really good stuff here that we might want to try to find synergies with. I haven't done the core standards alignment yet with the classroom group because it's just going to be massive, obviously. All right, one more thing to show you. And this kind of gets at something that is a book. I don't know if any of you have read the book by Chip and Dan Heath, by the Heath brothers. It's called Switch. And the subtitle of that book is How to Make Change When Change is Hard. The kind of change that we want to make is hard. And one of the things that these Harvard MBA people showed was they try to really dissect difficult changes that were made and try to understand how they were made. And what's really helpful is to give concrete examples of the change being made. And then what happens is that people see, oh, wow, that wasn't that hard. Or they see, I can do even better than that. Okay, you want to debrief from the legislature?
Yeah, I'm going to do a really quick overview. I'm not going to, you guys can go to the website, obviously, and see under the spotlights, you're going to see the a specific reference to things that happened up at the legislature. What I can tell you is that in January, there were two bills that were talked about specifically. Representative Johnson came and spoke about his hopes for the House Bill 124, which was, he hoped would fund innovative civic engagement pilot program. And unfortunately, funding didn't occur this year for that program. So that bill did not pass and that funding didn't come through, but funding did come through, and Axel is here. And I think other folks might be here from UVU's Center for Constitutional Studies. That bill did get passed. That's $1 million appropriation to help create a new civic thought and leadership initiative at UVU. So there's some real cool opportunities for us to collaborate and learn and grow with that. Then there's a concurrent resolution that was passed that there's a link on the website here to talk about that. And that concurrent resolution just shows you that there are lots of folks who feel like civic education is vitally important. And they want to create, Representative Lowry Snow wants to create a working group to look at how civics is taught currently in Utah and what are some of the ways that we can improve it. This collaborative, you know, you're doing a lot of great things. That's going to be, you're going to be very useful for Representative Snow in terms of informing the work that he wants to do there. It's a really interesting resolution. If you look at it, you're going to see a real emphasis on the kinds of civic skills that he thinks are essential, including really understanding misinformation and being better digital citizens. And so it ties in beautifully to a lot of the work that we're talking about. And then finally, you'll remember that Dottie Uman came and spoke to us in January about her bill, her idea of encouraging younger kids, 16 and 17-year-olds, to be able to vote in local school board elections. And that got onto the floor of the House, which is quite an accomplishment in a first year's bill. It didn't go any farther than that, but she is undaunted and she's a prime example, I think, of civic engagement. So take a look at that overview. And it's just, you know, again, one more way that we can kind of share the kinds of opportunities that are occurring and the kinds of attention that people are making to civics and civic education. So thanks.
Great. One more thing that I wanted to show you guys really quick, because this is something that we want input on. One of the things that you guys wanted was a lot more in terms of professional development. So we created a calendar showing those opportunities for professional development or civics related events. And look here at the bottom, you can submit your own. And we really want those, okay? So just be aware of that. All right, let's go on.
Oh, and Judy, I want to say one more thing. The April, I'm trying to remember the date. I think it's April 13th. We'll get the date for you. The governor's office, and Brittany Cummins is here from the governor's office. The governor's office is having, check this out, a student town hall meeting where students are going to be able to have a Facebook Live virtual town hall with the governor. I love that idea. And Alexia May, one of your students, is going to be a part of it. We've got our Senate youth delegates that are part of it, the Student Advisory Council that's a part of it. And that's going to be a half-hour long student town hall. Yet another example of really cool civic opportunities. So we'll send more information out about it.
Right. Now we've highlighted for you ways that you can begin to shape this, right? With the professional development calendar, you can comment on the blogs. The other thing you can do before I show you these options for communicating in more of a multi-way street is to, well, let me go to this first. So we don't want to just have a one-way street, right? Where we send you an email and hope that you read it, right? And it's just one way, right? There's so much synergy that's possible with those who are gathered here and elsewhere that we were really thinking it would be good to have. What I'm going to do is just put out some ideas for ways that we could interact and just kind of put your hand up if that sounds like a good one, okay? And probably we don't want to support initially more than one of these, okay, if that's all right. So I'm going to say, this is very old-fashioned. Listserv.
Listservs are fine.
Okay. Okay.
And feel free to throw ideas in the chat too. If you've got other ways that your groups or organizations have done a nice kind of synergistic way of communicating, feel free to add that in the chat.
Okay. How about something like Slack? Put up your hand. Okay, that got some. Okay. All right. You young people. All right. How about Google Chat and Chat Teams? Okay. All right. This is interesting. How about Asana or Basecamp, which is more about project management? Thank goodness for that. Any other ideas? Put them in the chat, please. Okay. And we'll figure out something. I'm going to say social media, and I'm probably going to regret it, but social media, Facebook, whatever, something like that. Okay. Okay. So that's what we have. Very good. All right. One more thing I can say before I introduce Shawn Healy, who is here with us, is we really want to spotlight different wonderful practices going on, whether it's at the LEA level, in the classroom, amongst students, amongst nonprofits. So please bug me, poke us, me or Robert, if you want to do a spotlight, and then we do an interview, and it's really cool because we want to feature everything that's going on. Some of you are already on the content calendar for early April. I'm looking at Melissa, so that's good. All right, without further ado, I'd like to turn to Shawn Healy, and some of you may recognize him from our June 2020 Place for All conference. It's okay if you don't, because Shawn Healy has jumped from the McCormick. He's really a national leader when it comes to supporting these kinds of state collaboratives. And he has a lot of deep, really significant experience in the field in Illinois. Shawn Healy is the Director of State Policy and Advocacy right now at iCivics. He just came from the McCormick Foundation, and you are really lucky to have him here. So he's going to present for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to leave about 10 minutes for Q&A. And please ask whatever you want. Shawn, let's turn it to you.
Thank you, Judith, and it's good to be back with you all. And what a wonderful conference you held back in June. It was an honor to be part of that. So Judy asked me to talk a little bit today to kind of start from a place of what is effective policy with respect to facilitating young people's civic development. And I'm going to start on a really basic level, like what do I mean by that? I think it's really important that we obviously develop young people's civic knowledge. The state statute that Robert put on the screen earlier certainly speak to that. So knowledge about our form of government, for example, at both the state and national level. There's a skills component to this, right? One of my skills I think is most important is the ability to address issues in a diverse group of people. Civic attitudes, really important. I saw an advertisement there for a free speech contest. So First Amendment appreciation for free speech is an example. And then civic behavior. So things like voting and volunteering or donating to a charitable cause. So collectively, that's what we're trying to facilitate. Schools have an affirmative role to play in that. and certain pedagogical principles drive young people's civic development. It's obviously bigger than what we teach in a classroom, so I appreciate that you have a committee dealing with things like school culture and SEL. But as we look at a classroom, the research tells us that one, on just a basic level, and this is an obvious statement for this group, but the quality and quantity of civic learning opportunities matter in terms of facilitating young people's civic development. And something that we know over a long period of time is that these opportunities have declined, that civics and social studies more generally have been marginalized. There's less instructional time than there used to be. That's not a good thing. What you do with that time also matters. And I'd like to argue, and the research backs this up, that it's a false choice when we get into this debate between direct instruction about knowledge and experiential learning. That the research suggests if we look at things like working hard, obeying the law, paying attention to the media, voting, the classrooms that facilitate the best outcomes in each of these areas are classrooms that have a mix of direct instruction and more interactive practices. And I'm going to get to those interactive practices in a little bit. There's a longitudinal study done, just to give you an example, in Chicago. And they asked students a number of questions, and just an example of a question, state and local issues matter to me. Paying attention to state and local issues matter to me. And this study in particular was interested in to what extent demographics drove responses to that question. And what they found was, yeah, they had a slightly negative effect, but what was most important, the three variables that were most important in predicting a positive response to that was one, opportunities that students entering high school had already. So yes, we need to start before high school in doing this. But the two big drivers were in-class civic learning opportunities, and then things like academic service learning. So community service tied back to what students were learning in class. And want to highlight one more principle that was alluded to earlier, and it's the power of discussion. There's a strong pedagogical case for discussion. One thing we know is that there's actually quite a bit of ideological diversity in our classrooms. In fact, our classrooms are much more ideologically heterogeneous than society as a whole. Two, we know that young people are still figuring out their positions on a number of issues. And three, we have an educator in the room that can help facilitate those discussions. And someone earlier mentioned the issue of polarization. I can't think of a better way to combat polarization. And then back to the research-based case, I've done some analysis of national test results, the NAEP results. And one thing that really struck me when I was looking at the last time we tested high school students, which unfortunately was a decade ago, but in that test, I looked at every practice, every variable that really tried to determine what predicted a strong performance on this test that mostly measures young people's civic knowledge. It's mostly about government institutions. And the practice that was most powerful was actually discussing current events in class. And I was even able to determine the ideal dosage of that, which was daily. So daily dosage. And that's particularly stunning on a standardized test that doesn't have any current events component to it whatsoever. So it just speaks to the power of these practices. Judy mostly asked me to speak about organizing this work in the work that a collaborative like yours is doing at the state level. And that's, she said, mostly what I have experience with in Illinois, and it's what I'm trying to do and working now with state partners across the country. And one piece I think is really important is that there's an institutional home for this work, that it's part of somebody's job description in coordinating this work. And I'll speak to the various phases of the work. But as I look at other states that have done this well, there's an institutional home. It can vary in terms of what it was. So yes, in Illinois, it was a foundation. In Florida, by comparison, it's a university-based center. Massachusetts, a big driver of the work was actually the JFK Library. So it varies tremendously, but an institutional home is obviously key. stakeholder representation. I'm so impressed by the not just the number of individuals that are part of today's meeting, but the vast institutional affiliations that you bring to the table. I think some of the key ones, as we look at this work across the country, are one, teachers. Teachers of the heart and soul of this work. So many teachers on this call, I know you are the experts, and you're in the trenches doing this work. So I think teachers are the heart and soul. Students are incredibly powerful advocates for this work. So I think it's important that students be at the table. School leaders, often when we do this work at the state level, there's actually quite a bit of opposition from school leadership. I found that if we engage school leaders, we talk about the importance of this work, and we work with them to strengthen this, it's very important. Clearly, people in the public sector, public officials are an important stakeholder group. And then the last group, which I think we probably do the worst job engaging, our parents. Parents are our young peoples, and many of us are parents. We are our child's leading civic educator. We got to bring parents into the process. So those are some of the big stakeholder groups. I think it's really important as a coalition does this work to kind of think of the phases, or a collaborative as you're organized, does this work to kind of think about 3 phases, and it's not necessarily linear, but there's one, the kind of building phase, and of course you're always building, but the coalition or collaborative building phase. 2, there's a policy phase, and Robert spoke to some of those opportunities in Utah. I found as we had our own campaign in Illinois, it took quite a bit of time to actually build up the capacity of our campaign, but then also to coalesce around a policy agenda that we all agreed on. And then I think really underrated but important is the implementation side, right? So Utah may well already have very strong policies related to civic education, but resourcing implementation is very important. Sometimes those resources will come from the state. In Illinois, they didn't, and they haven't. So we had to raise those resources privately with quite a bit of success. But, and I should say the campaign or the coalition in Illinois had to evolve to account for implementation and sustaining some of those policy wins. Last piece I'll say about organizing this work is the necessity of it being bipartisan. That is something that's literally part of my day job every day, is making sure that the work we do doesn't fall on partisan lines like seemingly everything else in our democracy. Civic education should be apple pie. It really is, and there's a lot we agree on with respect to this issue. So it's just critical, regardless of whether you're in a redder state like Utah or a blue state like mine in Illinois. I'm really proud to say the work that we did. We had bipartisan supermajorities for the legislation. We got passed in our state to require civics in middle school and high school, and had bills signed by a Republican governor and a Democratic governor. Last thing I'll say, I'll end with this, and it's the work that I moved over to in January. So I now work for iCivics, and we have a coalition called the Civics Now Coalition, which is very broadly focused on strengthening civic education in our country. We have a state policy task force. We're now 31 states are at the table. Like as Robert said, there's a lot that we just learned one another. There's so many things that have the right people in a room or in a Zoom. So we meet on a monthly basis to really have discussions about what's happening at the state level. But we also do provide technical assistance to states. And we are actively raising money that we can pass through to states. So we just did an RFP for states and awarded grants to 5 states to support their efforts. Wanted to highlight just a few successes that we've had, that our state partners have had. The big bright one is Indiana, where just last week a bill that would require civics in middle school and also create a permanent commission on civic education, passed out of their Senate unanimously, 49-0. It had previously passed out of the House 98-1. There's some reconciliation that has to happen between those two bills, pretty minor issues, and our partners at the Indiana Bar Foundation are already talking about a signing ceremony with the governor. We have a civic commission bill in Georgia, passed out of their Senate 45-4. So once again, really strong bipartisan support. And a couple of opportunities in Florida. You may have heard last week about Governor DeSantis's announcement about civic education, but a couple of bills that would put in place a civics practicum, so very much in the line of experiential learning, and also create a program called Freedom Schools, which emulate a program that we've done in Illinois called Democracy Schools. So those are just a few examples. I'll close by saying, if you haven't heard, there is a federal bill that occupies about 90% of my bandwidth these days. It's called the Civic Secures Democracy Act. Was just introduced with co-sponsorship in both chambers and from both parties 2 weeks ago. And we are fiercely in the process of reaching out to members of Congress, members of the Senate, asking them to co-sponsor. Big thing it would do, it's basically a program that would bring resources to states. So it's a grant program, and states are pretty resource starved with respect to civic education. So would love for you all to help with that, and reaching out to your members of Congress and to your senators. And I'll stop there.
Shawn, thank you so much, and for all that wonderful work that you're doing and mentoring us along the way. I just want to comment, your point about parents is so well taken. In fact, our character SEL group is going to be discussing how we can engage parents, because that seems really important. We have time for maybe just a couple of questions, and Robert, if you could monitor the chat. And then if you have a question, please raise your hand or stick it in the chat, and we'll see if Shawn can answer it. Any questions or comments? Don't be shy.
This is called Zoom wait time, because you have to also build in like people finding their unmute button while they're doing it. But
yeah.
But I do note that Michelle has put some information here about the highlights, and I do think parents, I think that, one point that Shawn, that you brought up is this idea about that civics education does not have to be riven by partisanship. Civics education is about all of us.
Okay, we have a question from Michelle, actually, and this is for Shawn. Where can we find more information about state successes, like Indiana's?
Well, so we certainly have some profiles of those on the Civics Now website. I'll try to pop that link in the chat box before I sign off. But we have some profiles of those successes there. I saw another question about practicum. I'm not aware of any state laws that specifically invoke that to date, but there's, as I said, the legislation in Florida, and there was one just filed in Texas that gets to that. But I am aware of other laws like the Utah law that was referenced that speaks to experiential learning. So in Illinois, we have both our middle school and high school requirements have a service learning component written into the law. Maryland is one of the only states that actually has a statewide service learning requirement. And Massachusetts in the law they passed, and these examples are highlighted on the Civics Now site. They have a project-based requirement written into the law that passed in 2018. So those are a few examples.
Let's take one more question from Alexis. If we could have a brief answer to that, that would be good. Alexis asks, I come from higher education where there is an interest in connecting civics and STEM. Have you seen some good examples of this in K-12?
So I would say this is the old hat I used to wear as a funder, and it's interesting you have a group that's dealing with media literacy. we did quite a bit of work with the Stanford History Education Project, the education group you all may have heard of. And they've been doing some really important work in media literacy. They're currently working across the curriculum with a high school in the Chicago area, actually a district of high schools, to embed media literacy across the curriculum, including science. So that's probably the best example that I've seen. So I think there's a lot of promise, because media literacy isn't just something that should live in civics. It's literally the 21st century literacy.
Right. All right.
Awesome. Thanks, Shawn. Thanks so much. I appreciate your time so much.
Yeah.
All right. I'm Stasha Wheeler. I'm the social studies specialist for Granite School District. And I like anything kettle cooked. But I'll be Costco. Their Kirkland brand. They make like one of the best kettle cooked chips I've ever bought, and you don't have that issue of like half air and half chip. Like they pack it full. Totally worth your money.
Yeah, I can go. My name's Brittany Cummins, and I am currently Governor Cox's education advisor. Tammy Pfeiffer's here, who's here before, but chips, I can't eat corn, and anything fried in corn oil, so limits my chip choices. But there is a brand that I have found that's hard to find. By late July, makes a tiger nut chip that is really quite delicious with guacamole.
So I'm Tammy Pfeiffer, and I'm hungry now. So thank you all for that. I work for an organization, a national nonprofit called Unite, and I work with partnerships and communications with Unite. And I think it was the wrong question. It's like not what the favorite chip, what the favorite dip is. So a couple of you got it right. The guacamole, the salsa. It's Lay's potato chips with dill pickle, homemade dill pickle dip. I have a great recipe, and it's super fattening. And so I don't eat it very often. But again, thank you. I'm hungry, and we'll just hold that thought.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for sharing. Judy, did you want to share? Our check-in question was
I just want to, okay, yeah, I just want to say hello. This is my favorite group, and I want to just be in it, but I can't. And so I just wish you all well. These issues are so dear to my heart. And I eat chips every evening at 6 p.m. And it's a different, always, it's very structured for me, and it's important. So thank you.
nice.
Just so you know, Judy says that to all the groups. All of the groups are her favorite groups. So.
Well, it sounds like someday we should all meet at Judy's house for chips at 6 when we.
I'll bring the dip.
All right. Well, thank you all for checking in. I think it's important to add some humanity and levity to our meetings, and so I appreciate your sharing.
First off, we kind of just want to get kind of a feel on if any of you kind of like signed up initially. What's your thoughts on that migration that we discussed on moving the controversial topics to the classroom discussion work group? Is that kind of you kind of agree that it belongs there within that kind of like sphere?
And I think along with that is, do you feel like this is a place where you want to be versus maybe having more of those conversations? We just want to make sure you're in the right group as well.
I feel like that's a good move. I feel like that there's a lot of those controversial topics I am having in my classroom on a small scale, and they're usually not associated with the topics that I feel like this group is going to cover with the media literacy and digital citizenship. That's almost a skill set in and of it. It is a skill set in and of itself. Apart from that, just having taught both of those sections, I feel like it's a good move, especially if we're moving towards putting this information in hands of teachers and having them be able to connect and collaborate. It will be more manageable for them to see it on that scale than here, I think. So that's my thoughts on it.
Any other thoughts? Okay.
All right. Good talk, everybody. All right.
what civics really is to me, which, by the way, Jeff, you were posing that question. To me, civics is belonging. It's another form of belonging. So anyways, that's me. Thanks.
Great. Kyle, will you tell us a little bit? And one of the things we're going to be talking about too is we're to brainstorm future spotlights on classroom instruction that seems to be working. And so if you can mention maybe like some of the others have done, maybe something that's worked for you, if that is related to what your introduction.
Yeah, so my name is Kyle Jensen. I teach at Copper Hills High School. I'm a lead teacher, lead coach, James Madison Fellow. I'm just trying to make myself feel comfortable in the room of why I should be here. I feel really intimidated, but I'm also working with the UVU Center for Constitutional Literacy with Axel and Jeff, and I teach U.S. history, concurrent and regular, and then I'm also a social justice teacher, so I'm excited to get into kind of the controversial topics and something that if to answer what is literacy, I would say that literacy main components are knowledge, skills, and dispositions of what that means to be an American. But something that I've found a lot of success with this year, especially in teaching my social justice class, is what you were kind of talking about, Tano, was about the history, but also what inclusion and belonging means, that America is this process. The Constitution is a set of processes for allowing more inclusion. And so, yeah. And also, Blanche, I've worked with Dennis Randall. He's one of my mentors. So love Dennis. So. Yep. And good to see you too again, Julia.
Molly, maybe you can tell us a little bit about you, and then maybe talk about either citizenship or something we could highlight or spotlight that's going on in classrooms.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Molly Wheeler. I work at the Hinckley Institute of Politics up at the University of Utah, and our primary mission is to work on civics and really foster civic engagement with college students at the University of Utah. However, in addition to that, part of my job is also organizing our Huntsman Seminar in Constitutional Government for Teachers. And so we work with K-12 educators, administrators. Teanu, having you on this call makes me want to find a way to get you involved as well. But we hold a week-long seminar every summer that is continuing education for educators. So you get those 3 graduate credit hours you need for your constant reaccreditation. But it's totally focused on politics, Utah's government, how to bring civics education into your classroom, and then also to really give teachers those hands-on connections with government. So we go to the courts and we go to the legislature and we meet with the governor.
We have a rubric that kind of mirrors a lot of the topics that we cover in our professional development to allow teachers to just kind of check themselves on where they find themselves over the course of their semester doing this work. And as Matt and Jenny both mentioned, it is hard, it is challenging, but that's also what makes the students learn those really important soft skills around having conversations with others. Let's face it, students aren't talking to each other right now. They're have their faces in a phone, and so those soft skills are elevated. And then the teacher also is able to learn and grow and kind of monitor their own progress.
Well, as we develop those guidelines, because it is one of the things that's a priority, are there people here who'd be willing to kind of help craft that if we had a smaller working group to kind of just look at some of the best recommendations for other teachers? I'm looking for volunteers. I have a nod from Megan. Do you have any other nods here?
I'm not a teacher, but I would love to help with that. And I actually was an AmeriCorps Vista at Generation Citizen with Megan. So I would love to help with that.
Oh, that'd be great. Thanks, Vincent. And I was on the board of the Utah Citizen Diplomacy. I have my gold star around here somewhere. So, All right. Alexis, do you want to move on to the next question we have?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you everyone for your comments so far. They've been really good. I've been capturing that in our shared document. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about with all of you is how to improve the knowledge and access to simulation programs, like all of you have described. So mock trial, Generation Citizen, We the People.
I think it might be in some ways easier in the early learning setting because the pickups and drop-offs tend to be a lot more. Yeah, there's a lot more interaction in a lot of pre-COVID, post-COVID things kind of like shift quite a bit because it's like, okay, leave them at the door. But prior to that, there's this encouragement for the families, the parents, or the other family members to come into the classroom with the child as they're picking up and dropping off, and that allows and provides the opportunity and encourages more of that discourse between the parents and the teachers in that space.
And what are some other folks thinking, or what's arising in this?
Well, and I'm not sure if this is what Judy wanted me to address. I went back to the email to kind of see what she had said, and she talks about the parent engagement. So just to let you guys know, really everything that we do is about working with parents. I mean, everything you have said today is just spot on, as you know, and that's what we really focus on really helping the parents. I mean, I've worked with a lot of different community organizations over the years, and a lot of wonderful things that have taken place and whatnot. But really, at this point, I look at it and I go, you know what? We can have all of these wonderful programs. If we're not engaging the parents, we're not going to be as effective. So that's really where we focus is on engaging the parents. So whatever it is that you guys are doing, and as you put things together, then our role is to help take that straight to the parents, take it into the home, help them implement that with their children. We've got some really fun tools that can be used. We have a fun discovery hunt platform that we can take pretty much anything, whatever you guys want families to do, we can put it into a really fun discovery hunt that the parents are playing with their kids, they're spending time with their kids, but they're also learning these important concepts. So
I was just going to say, Shirley, when we talked the other day, one of the things that I got really excited about and wanted to talk with you about when we do our spotlight is the idea of think about doing like a discovery hunt, a treasure hunt of like different places where civic decisions and processes happen, and you could do a treasure hunt online if you need to, because we don't need to, get COVID from doing this, right? So something like that. I got very excited about your program because I happen to be raised by very civically engaged parents, and boy, you didn't show up at the dinner table unless you voted. So
yeah, and that's been, our new tool. I feel like I got Christmas in August and we've been enjoying Christmas ever since. We have a new tool. You carry it on your phone. It can be during this time when we're trying to bring everybody together while keeping everybody apart. It's perfect because it's a great way to literally bring people together, but it's just on their phone, and it's, the family goes out together. Again, we can design it, however we want. We got a license. We have an unlimited license, so we can work with our partners, and we can set it up however we want. We put the missions in, we decide what we want, the families to go out and explore. And then for them, it's fun family time, and of course they love it when there are rewards and everything. So we like to throw prizes in, but yeah, that tool is available. I'd love to collaborate with anyone on utilizing that fun tool that we have. And then we also, our network of communities is a great way to get the work out that you guys are doing. So again, as things come together, whatever it is that you create, then our role is to get that out to the families and make sure that all of the families know about it.
So can I ask a question? How do people find out about it? Like how would somebody know that there's the treasure hunt?
So that would be something we would all work together on. First of all, we would, of course, promote it in our communities. We have a network. We've got 28 communities across Utah. Some of them are stronger than others. We have an amazing summer passport program coming up. So after summer, if every family in the state doesn't know about it, I'll be really surprised. But at this point, I mean, it's a matter of all of us working together to help get the word out and help let the families know. We, of course, can get that word out to the families that are already connected to our communities and the Discovery Family Adventures. We do a lot of collaborations. We've got a lot of collaborations going on right now about what's happening in this group and with the prevention coalitions and just all of anything that strengthens families. That's what we'll put it out there.
It seems like we could be using, it seems like if you're trying to get all the kids, you would go through the schools. Is it just hard to do that, or?
You know what? It depends on where we're at. I mean, I'm in Cache Valley. The schools are very connected. Box Elder, the schools are very connected. We actually with Jordan, we met with Jordan District. It really depends on which school are you in? Which area?
I'm in Nebo.
Okay. Yeah, I would love to meet with your superintendent. I mean, that's usually where it needs to start is, with the superintendent. But yeah, once they hear what we're doing, I mean, the schools are all over it. It's just a matter of, yes, us getting, if you can help me connect with the schools so I can show them what we're doing, then the schools absolutely love it. And again, it's free. So, schools love free.
This was back in the day before emails. I had them write letters to government officials. I had them do some research on a topic, decide who had some power over that, who had jurisdiction over it, and then send their letters. And one of them got a letter back that said, if you would have done your homework, you'd know I don't have any control over this issue. It was, a federalism issue. And that was great because he read it to the class and looked like a dummy for a little bit, but it showed really great lesson on how there are certain people in power that can help us in certain areas and others that can't. So you don't write to the president about, stray dogs in your neighborhood.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
I really loved what Kyle shared, particularly because I think that often, especially in our current society and world today, we forget to talk about principles. Like we're talking on the surface, but we're not actually in the soil. And so I'm half Tongan and half Maori, and in New Zealand, Maori are just known for protesting. Like we will go to battle for anyone, anything, anytime. We will throw down a haka. You just tell us where. And a couple of years ago, I was back home working on a project, and there was this huge controversial topic. It was around the TPPA at the time, right? And so they had this huge protest in Auckland City, and so I had lots of family go. There were a lot of students who went, and they were just throwing down these mean hakas. And I was talking to one of the students who went, and I was like, "So, what are your thoughts about the TPPA?" And she was like, "Well, colonization, and it's a bad thing." And I was like, oh, she doesn't know. She hasn't done her homework. And it really frustrated me, not just on a political level, but on a personal, cultural level, because I was like, my people are throwing down these hakas that they don't even know why they're throwing them down. And I'm like, how much more meaningful would it be if before they even went to protest, if they sat down and they had, I'm trying to think of what the English word is for somebody from both sides come in and say, these are the details from each side, and then decide as a group, are we going to go throw down our haka, or are we going to stand to the side? And I see that happening all the time today, where people are getting, I can't remember who said it, they're getting their information from poor sources, and which for me is one of the reasons why America is where we are today, is because we're like, oh, the news will tell us what we could find out on our own. Oh, we can go to this person or this network or whatever, instead of sitting down with a damn dictionary and reading the Constitution ourselves, right? Because that's a lot harder. Nobody wants to do that because it's hard. We're gonna have to flex our quads and our calves and maybe even sit in a squat for a while But nobody wants to do that because it's too hard. So they get commentary instead of coming up with their own ideas and opinions, and they're not nurturing their own soil. And to me, that's so powerful to me, particularly in my class, because my students come from all over the world. When we talk about George Washington being the father of the country, the first president of the United States, that doesn't matter. Like, that really means nothing other than here's the question, here's the answer. So what I try to do as an instructor is I tell stories about how he went into battle and he had hemorrhoids and he had to sit on a cushion, and he fell off the horse and, you know, grabbed the cushion and put it on another cushion. Why? Because they can relate to somebody who's ordinary, who has hemorrhoidal problems, who, you know, had, you know, somebody who's not just always so like immortalized and, you know, on Mount Olympus, somebody that they can relate to. And as we start learning more about the history, they can start seeing the similarities within their own families. Like, oh, this is a guy who was asked to do really hard things at really hard times. I'm doing really hard things at really hard times. Maybe we're not that different, you know? And so when it becomes their story. They're not learning about your history, they're learning about themselves. And to me, that's the power of principles, because then we're talking about them. Yes, history, it may be a different story, different names, but when we're talking about principles, we're talking about them. They're learning about them and who they are and where they belong.
That's great. We have just a minute or two left. Let me try to, one of the takeaways from your comment, I think, is
You got about 4 minutes. 4 minutes.
We have 4 minutes? Okay. So we want to nurture, I think, in classrooms, we want to nurture knowledge, skills, and disposition.
So as educators, how do you, within your areas, how do you shorten those gaps? I mean, what are some of your best practices that you're doing with students that maybe don't have those capabilities?
Such an important question.
So I think our school district has done a really good job at, you know, Logan School District, but we have a lot of challenging kids. We have the third largest immigrant population in the state. And so I would say half of my students are not native English speakers. So digital literacy is something that I really have to teach. They just don't know it. The other thing that comes up all the time, our district has given everybody Chromebooks. They've made hotspots all over town, so even if you don't have internet at home, you can have access to it. But that doesn't just make them digitally smart. You know, it doesn't help them figure out how to curate tools, and it doesn't help them to figure out how to buck the trend of having your own avatar online and being somebody else online, as opposed to being the kid that you really are online. So it's those kinds of tools that I feel like not even just our marginalized students, but every student needs that. That's really what I was interested in hearing. You know, how can we as a state make sure that these skills are being taught? Because whether you have access or not, you know, those things are easier to make equal, but the actual learning and the making sure that there's an adult helping them through and figuring out, you know, what's okay and what's not okay, that's something that's totally different.
I feel like too, there's two different gaps that you're talking about. There's a gap that with bridging a digital divide is what you're.
Okay. Robert?
Yes.
Do you want to try to get just like a quick 1 minute highlights from each group, whatever, you know, strikes them? And
Yeah, sure.
when the media group talks, I'm going to show a graphic that they meant to show.
Okay, great. So Jeff and Axel, do you guys want to go first and talk about your work?
Axel, why don't you take that? We didn't get the chance to hear from you at all.
Oh, not a problem. I was fiercely taking notes, so they're on the Google Docs. But I think the big takeaway is that we need to emphasize knowledge, skills, and dispositions. Without doing all three, there's going to just be a disconnect and a lack of effectiveness. And we had a lot of discussion around all of those things that you can see in the notes.
Awesome, thank you. It's a bummer. I mean, we have too many people. We have to send you into small groups, but I hate not being in those other groups. So it's awesome. All right, we had
character.
Yeah, who facilitated the character group?
Chris.
Chris Conrad, are you able to share out?
I don't know if he's still here. I had to go pick up his kid.
Okay, that's fine.
But I can.
Please, thanks, Amanda.
So we talked a lot about the new plug early learning standards and how, and I mean, I feel like a lot of our conversation was really about how enforcing social emotional learning at a young age and teaching those skills really evolves into civics, and how that looks and how those build on each other in such a magical way. And so we just started brainstorming about how that looks in different, and really it's about the little small things and how we can explode those, like Judy mentioned with the switch, or it made me think of the tipping point and things like that. And so how can we continue to brainstorm those to really elevate those, and so that you can see the connection between all those and how social emotional learning built that civic engagement.
Oh, it's awesome. Yeah, it's not just that everything I ever learned important was learned in kindergarten. It might even be pre-K. So I love that. I love that. All right, Judy, do you want to do the digital? Are you ready for that graphic?
Sure. Yeah, hold on.
Because if you're not, I can summarize really quickly.
I am.
Okay. Yes, and Amanda's asking the team if there's any other comments you want to make, just stick them in the chat about that.
Okay, there you go. Can you see a graphic?
Yep, we can see the graphic. So Michelle, did Michelle want to speak to this?
Sorry, I was muted. I'm happy to, or William, I mean, really anybody from our group could speak to this, but this helps represent the discussion that we had about the interconnected nature and overlap of media literacy, and digital citizenship, and coming to, I think, a shared understanding within our collaborative about how we define these things and how we see them interrelated. And Brian brought up a really important point that just cannot be forgotten in all of this about equity and inclusion. And so that really even pushes the continuum further on to include digital access and making sure that everybody, so Judy, we had talked about how, yeah, we're really focused on digital citizenship as opposed to digital literacy, but without access to digital tools and internet, and without basic digital literacy skills, we can't build media literacy and digital citizenship skills. So they really are all essential.
Yeah, great.
Awesome. And then the last group was the group that I was lucky enough to co-facilitate with Alexis. We were looking at both the experiential civics question about creating some guidelines and supports for educators, and so we actually got some volunteers to help in a little working group. So we've got that. Excited about that. And then we also talked about just the kinds of ways we can grow simulation programs like We the People and Project Citizen, and how important it is to build administrative support, how important it is to build and maybe even incentivize. There might be some possibilities there for legislation or funding that might help support teachers with some money. So we can kind of put our money where our mouth is in terms of civic professional learning, but also when teachers take on a special extra responsibility, that they get some compensation for it. So those are just a couple of things we talked about. Anybody else in that group, feel free to chime in.
Can I just add something that came from our group that's relevant to that group?
Yeah.
That in terms of experiential learning, that it also needs to include experiential learning online. So digital experiential learning and digital experiential learning with digital citizenship, not just in community and, you know, more of the typical civics experiential learning. I thought that was a really important insight that one of our team members talked about.
So great. I'm glad we're recording this because I can go back and look at those comments and kind of think about those in the future. So thank you. All right, Judy, do you have a last slide, or do you have anything you want to share on your screen?
Sure, hold on a second. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Right here, we just did our debrief. Thank you. And then just in terms of next steps, thank you so much for your amazing contributions and the note taking and great facilitation. What we may do this round is have the work groups meet once in April, and otherwise the larger group would meet again in May. Just as with this meeting, we really focused on bringing teachers to the table, as busy as they are, especially during COVID. Thank you for being here. Your input is absolutely critical in what we take on, so thank you. And what's going to be also very important in May is we want to have student input on what we're doing. So all of you here who interact with students and young people, please think about who you would want to involve to be able to give input on whatever is next, whatever is on our agenda for May. And that's what I have.
Great. So, you know, I just want to thank you all for this continuing efforts. We will send out, I mean, it's just the weirdness of Zoom. It's the weirdness of this virtual world that we're in. But this, this collaborative is really, I think, exciting in terms of sharing and building and learning from one another. And I am just really always honored by knowing how you, every single person to a person, step up for kids. That's inspiring, and I hope you all feel pretty inspired by that, and that you've met some really new, interesting, and committed humans that are in this journey together. So have a great rest of the day. I'll be hanging around for a little bit if anybody wants to chat. But
yeah, did you actually, we actually ended on time. It's 5 o'clock. How about that? You'll remember that in the future.
Great. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Victoria.
Thank you.
Thanks so much to all of you. This has been an excellent meeting.
Thank you,
Blanche. Great to see you.